Hold on tight! We've almost got you!
Pull, pull! He's coming free! Oh my God, you saved me! Thank you!
By the time the police were called to the Laurent mansion, the young housemaid was already standing in the center of the marble foyer, with her chin lifted and her hands trembling so hard she had curled them into fists just to hide it. Around her, servants froze with lowered eyes. Crystal chandeliers glowed above like cold stars. Rain beat against the windows in sharp, angry bursts. And at the top of the staircase, dressed in a dark suit that made him look carved out of shadow and money, billionaire Gabriel Laurent stared down at her as if she were something he regretted bringing into his home. "The necklace was found in her room," Vanessa said before anyone else could breathe. Her voice was smooth, expensive, poisonous. She stood beside Gabriel in silk and diamonds, one hand resting lightly on the banister, the portrait of a woman who had never been doubted a day in her life. "I told you she was too quiet. That type always is." Gabriel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Men like him had spent years learning that quiet was often more frightening than rage. "Did you take it?" he asked. The girl looked up at him. Elena Marquez, new housemaid, hired only 3 weeks ago. And in that instant, something almost unbearable passed through her face. Not guilt, not even fear. Hurt. Deep, old hurt. The kind that didn't begin tonight. "No," she said. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "It was found in your room." "Then someone put it there." Vanessa gave a little laugh. "Of course. A thief always blames invisible hands." Elena didn't look at Vanessa. She kept her eyes on Gabriel. That was the cruelest part. Not that he believed the lie. Not that he was ready to throw her out into the storm. It was that he looked at her with absolutely no sign of recognition at all. As if she were no one. As if the first time her hands had touched his skin wasn't while dragging him out of a crushed car before it burst into flames. As if the first time she had heard his heartbeat, it wasn't fading under her ear in the middle of a highway, drowned in rain and blood and gasoline. As if her father had not died on the same road while helping her save the man now staring at her like she was dirt on his polished floor. "I don't steal," Elena said, very softly. Gabriel's expression hardened, but there was something beneath it. Exhaustion, maybe. Or the kind of cold that comes from being disappointed too often to afford one more mistake. "You'll leave tonight," he said. "If the necklace is returned and nothing else is missing, I won't press charges." One of the maids inhaled sharply. Elena stood completely still. Something in her wanted to laugh, not because anything was funny. Because sometimes pain became so sharp, so precise, it broke the body's understanding of what to do with it. Leave tonight. 7 years ago, she had pulled him out of death with bleeding hands. Tonight, he was throwing her out with the same calm he probably used to cancel meetings. "You should be more careful about who you trust, Mr. Laurent," she said. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Gabriel looked impatient. "Is that a warning?" Elena swallowed. Her throat burned, but her voice didn't shake. "No. Just the truth. It usually arrives too late in houses like this." Then she turned, walked past the staring staff, and crossed the foyer barefoot, because she had been dragged down so quickly they hadn't even let her put shoes on. No one stopped her. Not Gabriel. Not the woman beside him. Not even fate, which had already taken too much and still seemed hungry. Outside, the storm swallowed her whole. And if anyone had followed her into the rain, if anyone had seen the way she pressed one hand against her mouth to stop the sob rising out of her, they might have understood that what broke her wasn't losing the job. It was realizing that some people can owe you their life, and still fail to truly see you. 7 years earlier, Gabriel Laurent was just a headline with a heartbeat. Not that Elena knew his name then. To her, he was simply a man trapped upside down in a black car on a flooded mountain road. One headlight blinking in the rain like a dying eye. She had been 19. Her father, Raphael, was driving, cursing the storm, telling her to hold the flashlight steady. Their old truck rattled over potholes as if it might fall apart from stubbornness alone. They were coming back from the market later than planned because Raphael had sold fewer fish than expected. And then he had insisted on stopping to help a stranded couple with a flat tire. That was who he was. A man who thought every delay was worth it if someone else got home safer. Elena remembered the sound first. Metal twisting, glass collapsing. Then the screech of tires and the sickening, violent crunch as the black car slammed through the guardrail and rolled halfway down the embankment, stopping against a cluster of rocks below the road. "Papa!" But Raphael was already braking. Rain hammered the windshield so hard, the world beyond it looked liquid and unstable. Elena's heart was pounding before she even unlatched the door. "Call emergency services!" Raphael shouted. She jumped into ankle-deep mud, nearly slipping as cold rain slapped her face. She grabbed her phone with numb fingers and tried to speak clearly, but everything had turned into motion. The smell of gasoline, the hiss of steam. Her father scrambling down the slope, her flashlight beam jerking wildly across crumpled metal. The driver's side was crushed. The windshield was shattered. Inside, suspended upside down by the seatbelt, a man hung bleeding and motionless, dark hair slicked to his forehead, one arm twisted awkwardly beside him. "Sir!" Elena yelled, banging on the glass. "Can you hear me?" No response. Raphael tried the door. Jammed. "Elena, the back!" he shouted. She wrenched the rear handle. Nothing. Raphael picked up a rock and smashed the side window with 3 savage blows. Glass burst inward. The smell of gasoline grew stronger. "Move!" he barked, shielding her with his arm while shards scattered into the mud. Together they reached in. The man moaned faintly when Elena cut the seatbelt with the small knife her father kept on his keychain. The second the strap snapped, the full weight of him dropped onto them. He was heavier than she expected. Dead weight always was. "Careful, careful." His eyes opened for half a second. Dark, unfocused. Terrified in that helpless animal way people looked when they were too close to dying to pretend otherwise. "There you go," Elena said, though her own voice was shaking. "Stay with me. Stay with me." He tried to say something, but blood filled the corner of his mouth. Raphael dragged him by the shoulders while Elena pulled from under the arms. They got him through the broken window just as a small burst of flame jumped somewhere near the engine. "Up!" Raphael shouted. Mud slid under their shoes. Elena's hands were slipping on blood and rainwater. The stranger groaned against her shoulder. She could feel the frantic stutter of his pulse in his neck. 1 step. 2. Then the car exploded behind them. The heat hit Elena's back like an open furnace. The blast knocked all 3 of them forward. She hit the ground hard, still clutching the man's wrist. For a second, she heard nothing at all, as if the world had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Then sound came back in pieces. Rain. Fire. Her father coughing. The man gasping. Sirens still far away. They made it to the roadside somehow. Elena used her jacket to press against the wound on the stranger's shoulder. Her father bent over with both hands on his knees, breathing too hard, one hand pressed to the left side of his chest. "Papa?" she said. "I'm fine." He wasn't. Even in the lightning she could see it. His face had gone gray, sweat mixed with rain on his forehead. He waved her off, stubborn as always. "Stay with him," Raphael said. "They're coming." The stranger's hand suddenly locked around Elena's wrist. His eyes opened again, just barely. It was the strangest thing, that moment. The road half flooded, sirens growing nearer, rain turning blood into pink rivers. And this man, who looked like he belonged behind the windows of skyscrapers and magazine covers, staring at her as if her voice was the only thing keeping him tied to earth. "Don't," he whispered. "You're not dying tonight," Elena said. His grip loosened. By the time the ambulance arrived, bright lights cut through the storm like judgment. Paramedics rushed toward them. Someone shouted. Someone recognized the injured man. "Oh my God, that's Gabriel Laurent." The name meant nothing to Elena, but it meant something to everyone else. Suddenly, there were more hands on him, more urgency, more radios crackling, more importance wrapped around his broken body. She turned back to her father. He was sitting now. No, collapsing. "Papa!" She dropped beside him, fingers frantic against his face. Raphael tried to speak, but couldn't. His breathing had gone thin and strange. "He needs help!" Elena screamed. "Please, please, my father needs help!" One paramedic looked at Gabriel, then at Raphael, then back again. "A second ambulance is on the way." "He can't wait!" "We have a critical trauma here." "So do I!" she screamed. But the world had already decided whose life mattered first. They loaded Gabriel into the ambulance while Elena knelt in the rain, holding her father upright, whispering nonsense and prayers and promises. Raphael touched her cheek with trembling fingers. Even then, even while pain hollowed him out, his eyes were apologizing for leaving. "Mi niña," he whispered. "Don't let pain turn you hard." Then his hand slipped away. When the second ambulance came, it was too late. By morning, every news channel in the country was reporting the miracle survival of billionaire tech investor Gabriel Laurent, the 30-year-old golden son of a financial empire, rescued from a fiery crash on a remote mountain road by an unidentified civilian who vanished before speaking to police. Miracle survival. Unknown rescuer. Elena watched the coverage from a plastic chair in a hospital hallway with her father's death certificate folded in her lap. No one reported that Rafael Marquez had died that same night. No one said that while one family received helicopters, specialists, headlines, flowers, and national sympathy, another family went home with a silence so heavy it seemed to bend the walls. That was the first time Elena saw Gabriel's face clearly. She hated herself for memorizing it. Years passed the way they often do for people who don't have the luxury of falling apart. Her father's death left behind debts, a rusted truck, and a family balanced on the edge of losing everything. Elena's mother, Lucia, had weak kidneys and the kind of pride that made suffering look like patience. Her younger brother, Nico, was bright enough to dream beyond their neighborhood, which made Elena more determined and more afraid. She gave up nursing school in her 3rd year. Only for now, she told herself. Only until the bills were paid. Only until Nico finished school. Only until her mother got stronger. But only for now is how people quietly bury whole versions of themselves. She worked wherever she could. Cafe mornings, laundry afternoons, cleaning offices at night, then caring for an elderly woman on weekends, where she learned the strange, intimate art of making another person's life run smoothly while your own remained stuck in place. Sometimes, Gabriel Laurent appeared on television screens above waiting rooms or in store windows she passed without meaning to look at. His company expanded. His interviews sharpened. His face grew more severe with age, more beautiful, too, in the way expensive sadness often does. Business magazines called him brilliant, ruthless, disciplined, untouchable. Not one of them knew he snored slightly when unconscious from blood loss. Not one of them knew he had once begged death not to take him without using a single clear word. Not one of them knew Rafael Marquez. Elena never wrote to Gabriel, never tried to tell her story. For a long time, she couldn't even explain why. Part of her was angry. Part of her was ashamed for being angry at a man who had been unconscious while the world chose him over her father. And part of her understood something she hated. Gabriel Laurent had not taken her father from her on purpose. Wealth had. Systems had. The terrible machinery of importance had. But it was easier, some nights, to give pain a face, and his was easy to find. Then Lucia got worse. It began with dizziness, then swelling, then long hospital waits and short answers that all translated to the same thing. Treatment would cost more than Elena could gather by bleeding years out of her own body, one paycheck at a time. So when a domestic staffing agency called to say a live-in position had opened at a private coastal estate with unusually generous pay, Elena nearly said yes before even hearing the name. Then the coordinator said it. Laurent residence. She stood still so long the woman on the phone asked if the call had dropped. The ocean outside her apartment window was gray that day. Nico was at school. Lucia was asleep with one hand over her chest. Elena could hear the old refrigerator humming in the kitchen like a tired animal. "You'd start Monday," the coordinator said. "The previous maid left suddenly. They want someone discreet, efficient, and calm under pressure." Calm under pressure. Elena almost laughed. By the time she arrived at the Laurent mansion, the sea below the cliffs looked like hammered steel. The house was less a home than a statement. Stone, glass, impossible views, clean lines so elegant they felt sharp enough to cut. Inside, everything was polished to a controlled shine. The kind of beauty that didn't invite you in so much as remind you what you didn't own. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Agnes Whitmore, was in her 60s and had the posture of a queen disguised as staff. "Do your work well," Agnes said as she led Elena through the service corridors. "Stay out of the family's emotional weather. And if Miss Vanessa is in a mood, become invisible." Miss Vanessa? Mr. Laurent's fiancée. The word landed strangely. Elena said nothing. Agnes opened the small room that would be Elena's. It was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window facing the staff garden instead of the ocean. Elena set down her bag and nodded her thanks. "Mr. Laurent keeps late hours," Agnes said. "He dislikes unnecessary conversation. He works from home often. He notices everything, says very little, and trusts almost no one. If he asks for black coffee, it means leave him alone. If he asks for tea, it means the day has gone badly." "That seems specific." Agnes gave her a dry look. "You'll learn." Elena did learn. She learned that the mansion had its own rhythm of tension. Gabriel Laurent rose before dawn, ran even in the cold, and answered emails as if lives depended on speed. He hated clutter, perfumed candles, overcooked vegetables, and people pretending not to lie. He could go an entire day speaking only 12 words if those were the only 12 he believed worth using. He also woke from nightmares. That was how Elena saw him closely for the first time. 3 nights into the job, she was carrying fresh towels past the east wing when she heard a crash from behind the study door. Not a casual sound, a violent one. A chair overturned, glass breaking. She hesitated. Then she knocked. "Mr. Laurent?" No answer. Another crash. She opened the door. Gabriel was standing behind his desk, breathing like a man who had run straight out of hell and into a room with no windows. A crystal tumbler lay shattered near his feet. His face was pale. One hand gripped the desk so hard his knuckles had gone white. For one terrible second, Elena was back on the highway. "Don't come closer," he said. But his voice gave him away. Too rough, too thin. This wasn't anger. This was panic. "I'm not here to bother you," she said carefully. "You need to slow your breathing." "I said, Mr. Laurent." Her voice softened without permission. "Look at me." He did. Not because he wanted to, because something in him was already too tired to fight. "In through your nose," she said. "Slowly. Hold it. Good. Now out." His chest jerked. He looked furious at needing help. She knew that feeling too. "Again," she said. The room was dark except for desk lamps and rain moving across the windows. Somewhere far below, waves were breaking against the cliffs with the force of things that never apologized. Gabriel followed her voice. Once, twice, again. The trembling in his hands began to ease. "Sit," Elena said. He sat as if the command had surprised him. When she bent to pick up the broken glass, he spoke without looking at her. "You shouldn't have come in. You would have sliced your hand open in 2 minutes. That would have been my problem." She straightened and met his eyes. It was. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, the edge of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. More like his face had almost remembered one. He studied her. Not as a man studies a servant, not even as a man studies a stranger. More like someone listening for a song he'd heard long ago and could not place. "Have we met before?" he asked. Elena felt something cold move through her. "No," she lied. He kept looking at her for a moment longer, then reached for the untouched tea on his desk and said, "Next time, knock louder." She should have left the room shaken. Instead, she left angry. Because his eyes had almost recognized something. Almost. As the days passed, the mansion began to reveal its fractures. Vanessa Cole arrived in gusts of perfume and entitlement. She was beautiful the way a dagger could be beautiful. Perfect posture, perfect makeup, perfect instinct for making everyone around her feel slightly inferior. She kissed Gabriel on the cheek like it was part of a contract and addressed staff without ever really seeing them. "This one folds table linen too slowly," she said once, nodding at Elena as if discussing furniture. Agnes replied, "This one has hands, Miss Vanessa, not machine parts." Vanessa didn't like Elena from the beginning. Maybe because Elena didn't flatter, didn't lower herself enough to be comfortably ignored. Gabriel noticed Elena too, though not in the way Vanessa feared at first. He noticed that the house ran more quietly when she worked. His dog, Atlas, a massive gray shepherd who trusted no one except Agnes, followed her around on the 3rd day and refused to leave her side. She repaired a torn curtain instead of replacing it. She remembered that the cook oversalted when nervous and adjusted side dishes before meals. She replaced fresh lilies in the West Hall after learning Gabriel hated the smell because it reminded him of funerals. "You're observant," he said one afternoon when he found her moving a vase from his mother's old sitting room. "You left it untouched for 2 months," Elena replied. Dust was the only thing visiting. He should have been offended. Instead, he stood there with one hand in his pocket, staring at the room as if he had forgotten it existed. "My mother liked this room," he said. Elena glanced at him. "Past tense?" "She died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." He gave a faint shrug, the kind people use when grief has settled too deep to perform itself. "She liked fresh oranges in that bowl," he added after a moment. "Not flowers." So Elena put oranges there the next morning. He didn't mention it, but he stopped avoiding the room. Slowly, against both their instincts, they began to exist in each other's line of sight. He'd find her in the greenhouse, trying to revive plants the gardeners had given up on. She'd find him at 2 a.m. in the kitchen, drinking black coffee in silence. He asked very little about her, just enough to prove curiosity had beaten indifference. "You studied medicine?" "Nursing." "Why stop?" "Life." He accepted that answer because he knew it wasn't really an answer at all. She learned more about him from the spaces between things. The locked drawer in his desk with old newspaper clippings. The scar near his temple from the crash. The way storms unsettled him. The way he froze for half a second every time tires screeched in the driveway. One evening, while bringing him files, Elena found a photograph on his desk. Not framed, just kept there. It showed a younger Gabriel leaving a hospital with cameras flashing in his face. Across the bottom of the article was a headline: "Billionaire survivor continues search for mystery woman who saved his life." Elena's fingers went cold. He entered the room before she could put it back. "That was years ago," he said. She turned. "You looked for her?" He loosened his tie. "For a while." "For a while?" He crossed to the desk, picked up the clipping, and stared at it with a flatness that hurt more than nostalgia would have. "I remembered a voice," he said. "A hand on my shoulder. Rain. Someone telling me not to die. Police found almost nothing. No witnesses who stayed long enough. The road cameras were useless in the storm. So you stopped trying." His eyes flicked to hers. "Do you always judge people this quickly?" "Only when they had the means to do more." Something sharpened in his face. "You know nothing about it." "Maybe." He set the clipping down carefully. "Maybe I got tired of chasing a ghost who clearly didn't want to be found." The words hit Elena harder than they should have. She wanted to tell him that some people don't disappear because they want mystery. Some disappear because the world barely noticed they were there. Instead, she said, or maybe she had her own reasons. Gabriel held her gaze. For 1 second, so much lived there it became dangerous. Then Vanessa's voice floated down the corridor, high and bright and false, and the moment was gone. The real trouble began with the Mar Azul project. Elena first heard about it from kitchen staff gossip. Laurent Global was acquiring coastal property south of the city to build a luxury resort and private marina. Thousands of jobs, the paper said. Modernization, investment, progress. Progress was always such a lovely word when spoken by people who didn't have to move. One Sunday, Elena went home on her afternoon break and found eviction notices posted along 3 streets in her neighborhood.
Her mother sat at the table staring at theirs like it had been written in a foreign language. "They can't do this," Nico said, pacing. "They can't just tell us to leave." But of course they could. The signatures at the bottom belonged to one of Gabriel's subsidiaries. That night, Elena returned to the mansion with a weight in her chest so heavy it made breathing feel optional. From the upstairs landing, she saw Gabriel in the study with two men in suits. Voices rose. The older man, Richard Cole, Vanessa's father and Laurent Global's chief financial officer, was insisting on aggressive timelines. "Sentiment is expensive," Richard said. "We can't delay because a few families are emotional." Gabriel stood with both palms braced against the desk. "I said review the compensation packages. They've been reviewed. They're predatory." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's a dramatic word." Gabriel straightened. "Try accurate." Elena stepped back before anyone saw her. For the first time, her anger toward him shifted slightly. Not gone, never that easy, but disturbed, complicated. He didn't seem to know the full cruelty moving under his own name. 2 days later, she found proof. Vanessa had left a folder in the blue sitting room after one of her charity committee lunches. Elena was gathering glasses when several pages slipped out. Land appraisals.
Internal emails. Compensation numbers altered after Gabriel's approval. Legal language twisted into something uglier than it first appeared. And at the bottom of one printed email from Richard Cole, "Gabriel doesn't read the final field reports. Keep him focused on investor optics." Elena stared at the page for a long time. She should have put it back. Instead, she made copies. That decision, small and desperate, was the first spark that reached the powder room full of other people's lies. The second spark was jealousy. Vanessa noticed change before Gabriel did. She noticed that he asked for Elena by name now, instead of saying someone. She noticed that Atlas slept outside Elena's room. She noticed that after difficult meetings, Gabriel preferred the quiet efficiency of the staff wing kitchen, where Elena sometimes prepared tea for Agnes, instead of the formal lounge, where Vanessa waited with strategic sympathy and perfectly timed affection. Vanessa once walked into the kitchen and found Gabriel leaning against the counter, while Elena bandaged a cut across his knuckles. "What happened?" Vanessa asked. "Paper," Gabriel said. Vanessa looked from his face to Elena's hands on his skin. Something in her smile tightened. That same week, Gabriel and Elena had their worst argument. He had just returned from a site review at Mar Azul, furious, silent, carrying the anger of 10 men who had spent all day lying to him. Elena was replacing books in the library when he came in and poured whiskey with the kind of precision people use when trying not to break. "You knew," she said, before common sense stopped her. He glanced over. "Excuse me?" "You knew people would lose their homes." His expression changed instantly. "That's none of your concern." "It is when one of those homes belongs to my family." The room went still. Gabriel set the glass down untouched. "Your family lives in Mar Azul?" "Yes." Something like disbelief flickered across his face. Then calculation. Then something almost like shame. "I approved redevelopment," he said. "Not coercion." "But your name is what showed up on the paper." He ran a hand over his mouth. "I'm reviewing it." "People don't need reviews, Mr. Laurent. They need roofs." His eyes hardened. "You think I don't understand responsibility?" "I think rich men say that word differently." For a second, it looked like he might snap back with the cold precision everyone feared from him. Instead, he said, quietly, "That's probably true." The honesty of it made her angrier. "Then do something." He stepped closer. "And what exactly do you think I am doing?" "Not enough." They stared at each other in the dim library while waves pounded the cliffs below. Then Gabriel asked the question that had been haunting him for weeks. "Why do I feel like every time you look at me, I'm standing trial for something bigger than this?" Elena's mouth went dry. "Because you are. Because you walked away from the worst night of my life with a scar and a headline. Because sometimes I still hear my father trying to breathe." But she couldn't say any of it. Not like that. Not in a room lined with first editions and firelight and all the things men like him inherited without understanding the cost. So she said the safer thing. "Maybe guilt recognizes itself." He flinched so subtly most people would have missed it. Vanessa did not miss the distance growing between them, neither did Richard. So they moved first. The setup was almost embarrassingly simple. A missing necklace, a frantic search, a staff room randomly inspected, diamonds found under Elena's folded clothes. By the time Elena realized what was happening, the entire household had already been assembled in the foyer. And Gabriel, exhausted from board warfare and betrayed too many times in business to keep trusting easily, looked at evidence instead of instinct. So he threw her out. What he didn't know, what Vanessa hadn't counted on, was that Elena had hidden the copied Mar Azul documents somewhere safer than her room. With Agnes. After Elena left in the storm, Agnes walked straight upstairs without knocking and entered Gabriel's study carrying the copied file like a loaded weapon. "You've made a grave mistake," she said. Gabriel looked up, still rigid with the aftermath of anger. "Now is not the time." "No," Agnes replied. "It is exactly the time." She placed the papers on his desk. He scanned the first page, then the second, and all the blood drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" "Elena found what Miss Vanessa and Mr. Cole hoped you never would." Gabriel looked up sharply. "You're certain?" "I have run this house longer than that girl has been alive," Agnes said. "I know what liars look like. Miss Vanessa wears hers like perfume." For a moment, Gabriel said nothing. Then he grabbed his phone, dialed security, and demanded access to every camera angle in the residential hallway. 23 minutes later, he was watching Vanessa enter Elena's room with something glittering in her hand. By the time he reached Vanessa's suite, he was no longer cold. He was terrifying. She tried denial, then tears, then offense, then seduction, then anger. He stood through all of it with the stillness of a man reaching the end of his capacity for self-deception. "Did your father know?" Gabriel asked. Vanessa lifted her chin. "He knows what matters." He nodded once, as if a final equation had balanced. "The engagement is over." She laughed in disbelief. "Over a maid?" Gabriel's eyes turned glacial. "No, over the fact that I almost became the kind of man who destroys the wrong person because it's convenient." Vanessa's expression flickered. "You're making a mistake." "I already made one." He left her there. Then he drove into the storm to find Elena. But pain has timing of its own. Elena had gone home soaked through, sick with humiliation and too tired to cry in front of her mother. She said the job ended early. Lucia looked at her daughter's face and knew that was a lie. But love sometimes chooses silence until the wounded can speak on their own. The next morning, eviction officers arrived with police support. Nico started shouting. Neighbors gathered. Phones came out. Fear became noise.
Then a black SUV pulled up, and Gabriel Laurent stepped out into the middle of it all. For a second, the entire street forgot how to move. He was not dressed for a boardroom. No tie, coat thrown over yesterday's shirt, hair damp, face like he had not slept. Elena came out of the apartment and froze at the sight of him. Gabriel looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, there was no distance in his gaze at all. Only urgency, regret. Something raw enough to be almost human in a way wealth usually edits out. "Stop the officers," he said to the legal team behind him. One of them hesitated. "Mr. Laurent, the process—" "I said stop." Everything paused. Even the sea seemed to listen. Gabriel stepped toward Elena. "I know about the necklace. Vanessa planted it. Richard altered the Mar Azul files. I was coming to tell you." Elena laughed once, hollowly. "How generous." "I was wrong. You were late." The words hit. He accepted them. People watched from windows and sidewalks, sensing something larger than an apology moving between them. "I've suspended the eviction action," Gabriel said. "And I'm opening an internal investigation." "An internal investigation," Elena repeated. "Do you hear how men like you always speak? Even repentance sounds like paperwork." His shoulders tensed. "What do you want me to say?" The truth, she thought. All of it. The old truth, too. But she was so tired. Too tired to rip open 7 years in public with neighbors listening and her mother behind the curtain and her brother trembling beside the door. So she said, "I want you to leave." He looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he nodded once.
Then he noticed the old photograph hanging crooked by the entrance. Elena is a teenager beside a weathered truck. Raphael between his children, smiling into the sun with a fisherman's squint. Gabriel stared at the face in the frame. Something small shifted in him. Not recognition, not yet, but a thread tugged. Before he could ask, sirens screamed from the far end of the street. Not police, an ambulance. Lucia collapsed moments later in the kitchen. Everything after that happened too fast for anyone to hide behind pride. Elena dropped to her knees. Nico was crying. Gabriel came inside without being invited. The paramedics arrived, and Gabriel used the authority of wealth for the first time in Elena's life in a way that did not feel like theft. "Which hospital has the shortest transfer time for nephrology?" he demanded. The lead paramedic answered immediately. "Go," Gabriel said. "I'll clear admission before you arrive." Elena should have refused his help. She didn't. Some needs are bigger than wounded dignity. At the hospital, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look more honest than they were, Gabriel sat across from Elena while Lucia was assessed and Nico slept folded over in a waiting room chair. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Gabriel said, "I saw the photo." Elena kept looking straight ahead. "Your father," he said. She closed her eyes. He heard the change in her breathing before he understood it. Then slowly, terribly, understanding arrived. Not as a full memory, as fragments. Rain. A man shouting. A hand older and rougher than the girl's, helping drag him uphill. A face blurred by pain and storm. Chest pain. Was there chest pain? Someone yelling for help after he'd been loaded in. A second voice. The same voice. The same voice. Gabriel turned toward her with something like horror. Elena. She stood up at once, as if the sound of her name in his mouth had become unbearable. "Don't." He rose too. "It was you." Her laugh broke this time. Not because she meant it to, because it came out broken and ugly and full of years. "Yes," she said. "It was me." He looked stricken. "Your father was there. He didn't just stand there. He helped save you." Gabriel's face went white. Elena swallowed hard, but the words had waited too long. They were no longer willing to stay buried. "The first ambulance took you," she said. "The second one came for him. Too late. And then the news called you a miracle and called me nobody. And you looked for me for a while." Every syllable landed like glass. Gabriel sat back down as if his body no longer trusted itself upright. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I know." And somehow that was worse. He covered his mouth with one hand. Elena had never seen a powerful man look truly defenseless before. Not performatively, not attractively. Just wrecked by the sudden arrival of a debt too large to measure. "I am so sorry," he said. She stared at him. "Do you think that sentence hasn't visited my imagination 1,000 times? Do you know how many nights I wondered whether hearing it would fix anything?" He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. Would it? No. The truth of it sat between them. Then she sank into the chair across from him, because anger was exhausting, and grief, once reopened, did not care how elegant the setting was. "I never wanted a reward," she said quietly. "I wanted the world to slow down long enough to notice my father died too." Gabriel's voice was rough. "It should have." "Yes." He looked at the floor for a long moment, then said, "I have spent 7 years thinking I owed my life to a stranger. I built half my discipline around deserving survival I never earned. And the whole time I was cleaning your floors." He shut his eyes. There are apologies that try to close wounds quickly so the apologizer can go back to living. This was not one of them. "This isn't something money fixes," he said. "No. But it may still help your mother live." Elena's jaw tightened. "I don't want pity." His eyes lifted to hers. "Then don't call it that. Call it a debt that should have begun being paid 7 years ago." Lucia stabilized that night. Not healed, not magically saved, just held away from the edge a little longer. In the days that followed, Gabriel did not disappear back into polished statements and controlled distance. He detonated his own life instead. He removed Richard Cole from all executive authority pending fraud investigation. He withdrew Laurent Global from the Mar Azul displacement plan and publicly froze all development. He ended the engagement, which turned into media carnage within hours. He released a statement, not through publicists but in person, saying the project had harmed vulnerable families through concealed internal misconduct and that the company would fund independent legal review, relocation protections, and neighborhood rehabilitation instead of forced acquisition. Then, in front of cameras and shareholders and people who had never heard Rafael Marquez's name, Gabriel Laurent said, 7 years ago, my life was saved by a young woman and her father on a storm road. Her father died that same night. History reported only my survival. It was wrong. People called it brave, noble, strategic. Maybe some of it was. But Elena, watching from her mother's hospital room, understood the more painful truth. It was also late. Still, late truth is better than lifelong silence. The final test came a week later, on the night the Laurent mansion caught fire. No one knew at first whether it was sabotage or panic or the ugly final tantrum of a collapsing empire. Richard Cole had entered the study after being denied access to files. Security footage later showed shouting. Then a lamp knocked over. Curtains lit. Alarms screamed. Most of the staff got out. Gabriel did not. Agnes called Elena because in crisis, hearts reach for the names that matter. He went back in for the archive drive, Agnes said, voice shaking. The whole West Wing is burning. Elena was at the hospital. Lucia asleep. Nico downstairs getting coffee. She should have stayed. She should have let trained people handle it. She should have remembered the last road, the last fire, the last time saving Gabriel Laurent cost her everything. Instead, she was already running. By the time she reached the mansion, smoke curled into the night like something alive. Fire trucks crowded the drive. Men shouted through radios. Atlas barked wildly from the lawn, straining against a handler's grip. "He's in the study," Agnes cried. A firefighter grabbed Elena's arm. "You can't go in there." But she was already staring at the broken west windows and seeing, not flames, but a rain-slicked road and a man upside down in metal. Some people become your unfinished sentence. You hate them for it. You save them anyway. She tore a wet cloth from a medic, wrapped it over her mouth, and ran inside before anyone could stop her. The smoke was immediate, thick, bitter, blinding. Heat pulsed down the corridor in waves. The alarms were shrieking now, almost lost beneath the crackle of beams giving way. "Gabriel!" she screamed. No answer. She reached the study and kicked the half-burned door inward. Inside, the room was a chaos of falling ash and orange light. A shelf had collapsed. Curtains were gone. And on the floor near the desk, barely conscious, one arm trapped under blackened timber, was Gabriel Laurent. Of course he'd gone back for files. Even near death, men like him still thought responsibility was something they could physically carry. Elena dropped beside him, coughing hard. "Gabriel!" His eyes fluttered open. For one disorienting second, he seemed not to understand where he was. Then he saw her through the smoke. And because the body remembers what the mind buries, fear flashed across his face exactly the way it had 7 years ago. "The beam," he choked. She braced herself and pushed. Pain ripped through her shoulder. The timber shifted just enough for him to drag free with a groan that sounded torn out of somewhere deeper than his lungs. "Can you stand?" He tried. Failed. The ceiling cracked above them. Elena got his arm over her shoulders and hauled him up. Every step toward the door felt like fighting a whole burning house with one human spine. Halfway down the corridor, Gabriel stumbled. Elena tightened her grip. "Stay with me," she said. He froze. The words. The same words. Rain had changed to fire, but the voice was the same. He turned his head toward her, dazed, wrecked, and suddenly no longer looking at the housemaid or the woman from the hospital or the quiet fury in his home. He was looking at the person who had dragged him out of death twice. "You," he whispered. Elena was crying now and didn't even know it. Tears, smoke, sweat, old grief. All of it the same salt. "You don't get to die tonight," she said. And then he knew. Not intellectually, completely. The road, the rain, her hand, the promise, the father, the debt.
The years of blindness, wealth had wrapped around him like armor until the fire burned it away. They made it out seconds before the West Wing windows exploded in a roar of heat and glass. Outside, on the soaked lawn, Gabriel collapsed to his knees. Medics rushed them. Lights flashed. Atlas broke free and barked madly beside them. But before anyone pulled Elena away, Gabriel caught her wrist. The same wrist he had grabbed on the highway years earlier. His voice broke in a way no boardroom had ever heard. "I remember." Elena looked down at him, chest heaving. "Good," she said. Then she let the medics take her. The weeks after the fire moved with the strange softness that follows disaster, when life feels both brutally fragile and weirdly precise. Richard Cole was arrested for fraud, obstruction, and suspected arson pending investigation. Vanessa vanished into the kind of silence money buys when it wants time to regroup. The Laurent mansion remained half-charred, the West Wing skeletonized against the sky. Gabriel moved into a smaller guest house on the estate and began rebuilding not the walls, but the way he occupied his own life. He visited Lucia often, but never unannounced. Paid every medical bill, but never used the payments like a key. He arranged the best specialists, then sat in hallways like any other worried relative, tie loosened, eyes tired, learning humility in fluorescent light. Elena did not forgive him quickly. That mattered. Some stories lie by making healing easy. This was not one of them. There were days she couldn't stand the sight of him, because gratitude and anger make cruel roommates inside the same heart. Days when seeing him carry groceries into her mother's kitchen made her remember the ambulance. Days when hearing Nico laugh with him over burnt coffee in their tiny apartment made her furious at how easily life could still produce warmth where there had been ruin. Once, on the pier at sunset, Gabriel handed her a small velvet pouch. She opened it and found a charred silver charm inside, half of a saint medal. Her breath caught. "I woke up in the hospital with this in my hand," he said. "They told me it must have snagged in the wreck. I kept it because it was the only proof someone had really been there." Elena reached into her coat pocket with shaking fingers and pulled out the other half. Her father had worn the medal on his keychain for years. When she placed the broken pieces together, they fit. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Gabriel said, "I used to think recognition was remembering a face. But it isn't, is it?" Elena stared out at the darkening sea. "No," she said. "It's understanding what your life cost someone else." He nodded, as if accepting a sentence. Months later, the Mar Azul Community Clinic opened in a renovated building overlooking the same coast that had once watched families panic over eviction notices. Above the entrance, in simple lettering, were the words Rafael Marquez Health Center. Gabriel had wanted something grander. Elena refused. "My father was a simple man," she said. "Let his name stand plainly." She returned to nursing school that autumn, with Gabriel quietly funding a scholarship in Raphael's name, not hers, because he had finally learned that giving people dignity matters more than draping your gratitude over them like a banner. Lucia got stronger. Nico started university. Agnes retired, but still visited every Thursday to criticize everyone's tea. Atlas chose Elena, as if there had never been any doubt, and spent half his time between her apartment and Gabriel's guest house, unimpressed by class distinctions. And Gabriel? He changed slowly, which is the only way change ever counts. He listened more, delegated less blindly, stopped treating control as the same thing as care. There were still shadows in him, still storms he wore behind the eyes. But now, when panic reached for him, he didn't lock doors. He called things by their names. One evening, long after the clinic opening, and long after the press had moved on to fresher scandals, Gabriel found Elena on the mansion cliffs where workers were finally rebuilding the burned wing. The sky was turning gold.
Wind lifted loose strands of her hair. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's usually dangerous." A smile touched his mouth, real this time. "I know I don't get to ask for more than you want to give." Elena looked at him. He went on, quieter now. "But if one day you ever decide to see me as something other than the worst night of your life, and the man too blind to recognize you after, I'd like the chance to deserve that." She held his gaze for a long moment. The old house behind them was still scarred. The sea below was still wild. Some losses never stop shaping the shoreline of a life. But scars, she was learning, were not only proof of damage. Sometimes they were maps. "I don't know what comes next," she said. Gabriel nodded. "Neither do I." For once, that uncertainty didn't frighten either of them. Because this time, there was no illusion, no worship, no fairy tale about billionaires and miracles and women who save them. Just two flawed people standing in the wind, finally looking at each other clearly. And sometimes, that is where a real story begins. Not when someone is saved, not when someone is recognized, but when the truth arrives, late and burning, and both people choose not to run from it. If you were in Elena's place, would you have forgiven the man whose life you saved, even after losing so much because of him?